I actually never, like, asked any of my partners what they liked. I just, like, based it off of what, what, like, Cosmo said. I would, like, read the magazines that women were reading, and then I would read, like, Men's Health. And then it'd be like, use these 10 tricks to last longer. Or these 5 things to have the best sex of your life. It actually took me quite a while to find out the geography of the female genitalia, which I'm not entirely clear on right now either. I mean, I am from like a reproductive standpoint, but from a pleasure standpoint, it's kind of like, no? No? Yes. Okay, I'm just going to stay here then. Yeah. I mean, the conversation has changed from the first moment I was interested in sex to now. It started off as, how do you have sex? Like, how do you culturally get girls to be interested in it? And how do you approach, more so, how do you approach the conversation of sex? When I was growing up, I realized that there was a lot of different things. There's the physical stuff, the biological stuff of making a baby and STIs, but what I wish I had learned was a lot more about the etiquette of how to approach the romantic, touching, and sexual world. So high school was all about sex, basically. I was in band, and there was stuff happening in band. There was the sports, and there was stuff happening with the cheerleaders and everywhere else. Parties, people's parents being out of town. And, it was like virginity was dropping like flies left and right. And then it was seemingly, I felt like losing my virginity at 20, I felt late. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's the impression that I got, that most people lost their virginity before high school was over, sometime between junior and senior year. So when I had sex ed, basically was, if you were gay, you got HIV, and lesbians were not mentioned whatsoever. Now I would say that I'm educated in a bunch of different ways, right? So I have a platform called No Pressure, No Shame. And that is basically a social experiment about modern romance. So I'm always talking to people and getting their take on a cultural survey, if you will, on different people's perspectives. I also do a ton of reading about, not just straight sexual relations, but all kinds. And I also have really in-depth conversations with the people I'm sleeping with. I think there's different stages where the conversation changes, and I think at each stage there's probably different information that's relevant. In terms of creating pleasure and consent, that whole conversation, that's probably the biggest area I wish I had more education in, actually. I mean, I feel like the biological stuff of making a baby and sexual health in terms of STIs is probably paramount, but right along with that is the cultural approach to having sex with someone, and what is some etiquette around that are the two biggest things. Some people like certain things, and other people really don't like that exact same thing. It is a revelation that I came to in the past, years of being with different women. And so there isn't a rule book of sexual pleasure, and there isn't a rule book of things that are sexually tolerable. But that's why the consent thing was such a big deal, because then you have a mechanism for finding out what people like and don't like. Well, so as far as educating myself after I started having sex, I got really interested in Eastern sexual philosophies like Kama Sutra and Tantra. So I began to experience, to learn about the potential for experiencing sex as a spiritual thing. And that was also a bigger, perspective shift in my head as far as how I could relate to sex. And it was about more than just being physical. I am generally the person in my peer group, as far as men, actually, and women too, that was like giving advice about stuff. So at this point, I've become more of an educator, but not in like a formal sense necessarily. Once I realized I was having these conversations, I would have questions that were asked of me that I didn't have the answers to, that I would then go read up on. And then the next time I had those questions come up in conversation, I did have answers to. And not answers in a definitive sense, but just like perspective to share. And also dated much older women for a period of time. So like the way that my placement of sex wasn't necessarily the conventional placement. If I'm sleeping with someone who hasn't been with a partner in a long time and I'm their first partner, I'll ask, you know, what are your emotions that are coming up around the way things are going because it's been so long for you? You know, just asking people how they feel about it keeps me informed on different ways of looking at it. I personally have never had shame tied to sex in a like front of mind way, but I can tell that there is some shame in there because of certain things I'm willing to talk about or not. Right? So it's like, why do I feel the need to keep this particular part of the story private? We need better sex ed because I thought silence was consent.